Last winter, over 40 million Americans lost power during peak cold snaps, not for minutes, but for hours, and some for days. The scary part? The engineers who run the grid knew it was coming. This winter is shaping up to be worse, and here's exactly why. Welcome back to the Silent Borders, where we expose the systems quietly shaping your life. Today we're going deep on the US national energy grid, why it's structurally fragile, what specifically breaks down in winter, and why the same failures keep repeating despite billions spent on so-called upgrades. By the end of this video, you'll understand the grid better than most politicians who vote on it, and you'll know exactly what to watch for this season. So if you've ever sat in the dark during a winter storm wondering why this keeps happening in the most powerful country on Earth, this video is for you. Stick around, because what we're about to uncover is equal parts fascinating and deeply frustrating. Let's start with a fact that most people find genuinely shocking: the backbone of the American power grid was largely built in the 1950s and 60s. We're talking about infrastructure that was designed before personal computers existed, before anyone imagined millions of electric vehicles charging simultaneously, before solar and wind farms were feeding electricity back into the system from 1,000 different directions. The engineers who built it were brilliant, but they were building for a world that no longer exists. They designed a one-way system: power plants generate electricity, it flows through transmission lines, it reaches your home. Clean, simple, predictable. That world is gone. Today's grid is a two-way, multi-source, constantly fluctuating network that the original designers never planned for, and it's straining under that pressure every single day. The average age of a US power transformer is over 40 years old. And these transformers aren't just old, they're massive, custom-built pieces of equipment that can weigh hundreds of tons. When one fails, you can't just order a replacement on Amazon. Some of these units take 12 to 18 months to manufacture, and often they have to be shipped from overseas because domestic manufacturing capacity has shrunk. So when a transformer fails in a deep freeze, and they do fail in deep freezes, because extreme cold causes metal to contract and insulating fluids to thicken, there is no quick fix. You wait. In the cold. And that's just transformers. The same age problem runs through substations, transmission lines, and the software systems that coordinate it all, much of which still runs on technology from the 1990s. Now, why is winter specifically so dangerous? Summer gets all the headlines: heat waves, air conditioning overloads, rolling brownouts. But winter is actually the harder test. When temperatures drop sharply, electricity demand spikes as millions of people crank up their heat. That part makes sense. But what most people don't realize is that the supply side takes a hit at exactly the same moment. Natural gas powers roughly 40% of US electricity generation, and when it gets cold enough, natural gas infrastructure simply stops working. Gas freezes at the wellhead. Pipelines develop ice blockages. Compressor stations, which keep gas moving through the network, fail in extreme cold if they haven't been properly winterized. So at the exact moment demand is surging, supply is dropping, and that's the nightmare scenario grid operators fear most, and it's not hypothetical, it's happened repeatedly. You might remember the Texas freeze in February 2021, nearly 250 people died, millions were without power for days in sub-freezing temperatures, water pipes burst across the state, and the economic damage ran into the hundreds of billions of dollars. And here's the part that should make every American angry: state regulators and utilities have been warned about exactly this scenario after a similar, smaller freeze in 2011. The recommendations to winterize equipment were largely voluntary, most utilities didn't fully comply, and a decade later the same failure happened again on a catastrophic scale. Texas isn't alone in this. Similar vulnerabilities exist across the South, the Midwest, and parts of the Northeast. The geography is different but the fragility is the same. And now we have an entirely new problem layered on top of the old ones. Demand is exploding in ways the grid was never designed to handle. Think about what's changed in just the last 5 years. electric vehicles are going mainstream and a single EV charger draws as much power as an entire older home. AI data centers are multiplying at a staggering rate, running 24 hours a day, consuming enormous amounts of electricity. And between 2022 and 2024, US electricity demand grew more than it had in the previous decade combined. Utility planners who projected flat growth for 20 years are now scrambling to revise their forecasts dramatically upward. At the same time, older coal plants, dirty but reliable, and nuclear plants that run with extraordinary consistency are being retired, replaced by solar and wind technologies that are genuinely wonderful but have one fundamental limitation: they only generate power when the sun is shining or the wind is blowing, and on a dark, still, brutally cold winter night, a solar panel produces nothing and a frozen, calm wind turbine produces nothing, and that gap between what renewables can promise and what the grid needs at its most critical moments is exactly where blackouts are born. So why isn't anyone fixing this? That's the question that makes energy experts simultaneously laugh and despair. The answer comes down to three things: structure, incentives, and time. The U.S. grid is a patchwork of over 3,000 separate utilities operating under different state regulations with limited national coordination. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission has oversight but limited enforcement teeth, especially at the retail level, and there is no single authority that can look at the entire national grid and say, fix this by this date or face consequences. The incentive structure makes it worse. Most utilities are regulated monopolies that earn a guaranteed return on capital investments, meaning they make money by building new infrastructure, which creates a bias toward large visible projects over the unglamorous invisible work of hardening existing systems, so the boring critical maintenance gets deferred year after year while the grid grows older and more fragile underneath. The bipartisan infrastructure law put real money toward grid modernization, and that money matters, but money alone doesn't solve a permitting problem that stretches a decade, and that's not an exaggeration, because the average time to get a new high-voltage transmission line permitted and built in the United States is between 10 and 15 years, while the demand growth that requires those lines is happening. We are building the grid of 2040 at a pace that won't keep up with the needs of today. That is the structural reality no one in Washington talks about clearly enough. So what can you actually do with all of this? First, know your grid operator. Google your area and find out if you're on PJM, ERCOT, MISO, SPP, or one of the others, because each of these operators publishes winter readiness assessments that are public, free, and often genuinely alarming in the most informative way. Second, prepare practically for a 24 to 48 hour outage. Backup battery power for essential devices, extra water stored, a way to stay warm that doesn't depend on the grid, not panic prepping, just sensible readiness, the same way you'd keep a spare tire in your car. Third, engage locally. Your state utility commission holds public meetings and accepts public comments, your city council votes on local energy policy, and most of these meetings happen with almost no public attendance. When ratepayers show up, speak, and push for accountability, utilities and regulators actually respond, because almost no one else is watching. If this video gave you a clearer picture of what's at stake, please hit the like button. It genuinely helps the silent borders reach more people who need to understand this stuff. Subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. And drop a comment below. Where do you live, and how worried are you about your grid this winter? I read every comment and I want to know what's happening in your part of the country. Next week, we're going inside one of these regional grid control rooms. You'll see exactly how operators manage a system that has essentially zero margin for error, in real time, under real pressure. It's one of the most fascinating and nerve-wracking places I've ever been. This is the Silent Borders. Stay informed, stay prepared, and I'll see you in the next one.